Hi guys, it's Sierra from Woodrock's Woodshop, and I am going to show you everything you need to know to do an epoxy pour project with our new do-it-yourself form. So I've got one that's here that's broke down that I'm going to put together so I can show you everything you need to do when you order one. And then I've got one here that's already ready to go, that's all siliconed and ready for me to show you how to pour. So first we're going to start with just everything you need before you get started. You want to make sure you have a plan. You want to make sure that you have a space that you can kind of set up in and put some plastic down, make sure that everything around it, just in case, even just while you're mixing, you make a bit of a mess. So you want to make sure your area's good and ready for you to do your project. You want to make sure you have your PPE. So this epoxy, when you're mixing it, it can splash, and you definitely don't want to get it in your eyes. So you want to make sure you're using safety glasses, and then gloves, lots of gloves. I end up usually, switching them out a couple times because you end up getting them messy. So have a couple of those on hand. We use a temperature gun, which you don't have to use this, but it's highly recommended to make sure all the temperatures stay, your room temperature and the temperature of the epoxy stay where you want them. So again, we'll talk more about that once we get a little bit further. Mixing sticks. So these are just from the dollar store. They're just little craft sticks. We use them for a lot of things. We use them for measuring out our mica, mixing our mica, and also for leveling our form on our surface. So if you've got your surface and it's not a perfectly level table, you're going to want to make sure you level your form before you pour into it. So which will also bring me to my next thing you'll need is a little level. If you can get these at the dollar store too. Honestly, they're just a simple thing that you want to make sure, because if you put your wood in and have your form not level, it'll be at a lean, and then it just causes you more work, and or you waste a bunch more epoxy and wood that you don't want to. So that's what we use those for. Also, after your pour's done, you're going to need a little hammer or a big hammer and a paint scraper or a wedge of some kind to kind of get around and scrape around the underneath and tap it up and lift it. So those are two things you'll need after. You're also going to need silicone. We use 100% silicone. The one we're using is mono silicone, but any 100% silicone is good. You don't want to get an acrylic mix. For whatever reason, it does not mix well with the epoxy, and it actually will leach right into the epoxy. It's a total wreck. We didn't know that when we first started, and had a few projects go completely wrong with that. So definitely make sure it's 100%. Depending on whether you want to go clear or whether you want to add some color, you're going to want to get some pigments. Now you can get them all over the place, but different pigments definitely give you different results. So I know we use these are Polymers technology, but we also use black diamond pigments a lot. You can see we have a rainbow of colors. They've been so good to us, and the results with these things are unbelievable. Every time something different happens, and it's really good. But we've also really been happy with using these Polymer Technologies ones as well. So they also do liquid dye. They're called chill drops. So this is liquid pigments that you use for colors that you want to have transparent. You don't want all that really like mica swirl in it. You just want it to be colored but transparent and clear. So that's what you use those chill drops for. Next, you're going to need buckets. Polymers is awesome and has these already measured out buckets, which makes it so easy to mix because their epoxy is a 2-to-1, so you have to measure 2 part A and 1 part B, and it's extremely important that you measure them exactly correct, or if you wing it, you're going to wreck your epoxy, which is kind of a disaster, so don't do that. You want to make sure you mix them properly. The other thing we do is mix with silicone mixing spatulas. We love these. Again, you can get them at the dollar store. They allow you to really get all the way around the edges, and when you're scraping things out, you can get right to the bottom. And then not just that, when you're done, you just wipe it off, and then wait till it dries, and then you can flake off the rest of it, and it's ready to use again. So you don't have to get rid of them every time, which is nice. Yeah, so that's basically everything you'll need. Now, moving on though, you're also going to want to have a piece of wood. You need something to put in here. Today we're going to be casting these amazing pieces of cottonwood. Right now, for your piece, you want to make sure that you have something that's flat. We are going to be flattening this again on the bandsaw after, but for your piece, you're going to want to make sure the bottom and top is flat before you put it in here, just to make sure that you're A, wasting the least amount of epoxy as you can, and then B, so that when it comes out of the form, you're having the least amount of finishing. With this form, in theory, if everything goes according to plan, you should be able to put your wood in, cast everything, let it set, and then when you pull it out, you should have very minimal flattening and sanding and everything to do if it goes according to plan. Which with basic do-it-yourself tools, you guys should all be able to do this and have a really cool cutting board or art piece when you're done. So I'm going to move on to talking to you guys about our form. So reusable, easiest to use form. This HDPE that we are lining everything with is like magic. If you have worked with epoxy before, you can see we use this tuck tape, and sometimes we, depending on the size of form or different things, we've used tuck tape lots in the past, and it doesn't come off as nice. You actually have some chemical reaction from the tape to your epoxy, which can cause bubbles. There's a whole bunch of reasons why we have moved away from the tape and to this HDPE. Not to mention, if you've watched any of my videos, you can see how easy it just pops out, and it makes your project so much easier and more fun, really, at the end of the day. So we've got an MDF base. We've got everything lined with the HDPE, and then we've got 2x4 sides that frame everything around, and they're also, they have threaded inserts inserted into them that go around, and then bolts go through them, so everything that makes it easy for you guys to put it together when you get it there. They're all put together with these bolts. So there's the small ones for the bottom, and then you've got the long ones for the side. So this is all going to come with an instruction manual too. Don't worry, it's not just this video. There's going to be actual paper instructions that you guys will get to, that'll be a lot easier to follow too. And so yeah, so I'm going to actually do a time-lapse video of putting this together for you guys. But before I do that, I'm going to tell you. So we put everything together, you line everything up, you've got all your stuff tightened, and that's one thing I will mention. We cannot over tighten this. So we recommend doing it by hand. You can use a drill with a socket if you turn down your drill and make sure you don't over tighten them. It's super critical, because if you put too much torque on them, it'll totally rip out those threaded inserts, which then you wreck your form and you're kind of back to square one. So we recommend using a wrench for it. If you have a wrench is obviously easier to use, it just takes longer. We also, so you put it all together, you're gonna put your lining in, shoot, that's what I was gonna mention, the backs of these. So what we've done with these, the HDPE is obviously, it doesn't stick to hardly anything. That's kind of why we like to use it, which does obviously pose a problem in putting it in, but we have roughed the back up with a wire wheel so that it's got some texture to the back, and then we use just the same silicone that we're using to seal all the edges. We use it on the back. So you put a big good bead on, and then you're actually just gonna stick them in and line the entire side, and it sticks right away. Everything, like I said, because we've roughed it up, it gives it something to grab to. So you're gonna line that all up, put everything down, tighten it all up by hand, but not over tighten. And then once you're done, we're gonna go around, and you can see this one's all together now. So then once it's together, everything's inserted, you're gonna go around and silicone each seam on the inside, and make sure you do a really good job of this. This is where your water tightness comes from, and that is critical for no leaks. So you're gonna wanna go around and you put your silicone all the way up your edges, make sure you clean it up. Lots of times we like to use a cup of water with your finger. If you dip your finger first and then use that with like a paper towel or whatever, you can get a nice clean seam all the way around, and you can see that we've got a nice clean seam in there. And I can actually show you kind of the sides and the back. So here are where your threaded inserts are all going in the bottom. They're all recessed so that it all still sits flat, which is nice base. And on the sides, you can see here, got our side ones that go in. Everything's nice and tight, but again, easy to take apart, because once we pop it out, you only actually have to remove one side. We're gonna remove these two and these two, and then from the bottom here, you're gonna remove these two and these two, and this will actually just pop out, and you'll be able to get underneath with my paint scraper that I showed you, and then you knock around the edges just to kind of release it, and then you're able to pop it right out with only taking one side off. So that's also really cool, because then you just have to re-silicone your few edges, put that back on, and you're ready to go again. So anyway, I'm gonna move on to a time lapse, and I'll show you guys how we put this together, and then we'll move on to the wood stuff after. So we've got our form together, we've got our flattened pieces of wood. Now it's time to move on. So you're gonna wanna silicone your edges at the same time as placing your wood. You don't have to, but in our experience, if you wait until the silicone's dry to put your wood in, you run the risk of the wood catching the silicone on its way down or moving it and then breaking that seal, because you only get one shot with the seal between the silicone and the HDPE. So we find that if you do your silicone edge and silicone your piece into your form at the same time, it kind of all has the chance to jive together and make sure everything's got a good seal. So I'm going to show you how we do that. So we've got this piece, it's flattened on the bottom and it's not totally flattened on the top, but we just run it through the planer after. But if you don't have a planer, you want to make sure you start with flattening top and bottom. All right, and then so we're also going to just take a bead of silicone and run it around the edge. This also just makes sure that you're not wasting a ton of epoxy underneath. Sometimes though, you do want to cast, depending on what you've got or what you're making, you do not want to put the silicone on the bottom. You actually want to fully cast it because you want it to soak up into every little spot. Because this is just a smaller art piece, you're not making a table or anything crazy, you can get away with silicone on the bottom and wasting less epoxy. So, and everything had been test fit before we did this. Again, you want to make sure everything's ready before you get to this stage. So we knew this was going to fit, but if you don't, you want to make sure you test fit everything before you put any silicone in it, so you're not taking it in and out and again wrecking that silicone barrier that you've got around. All right, so that looks awesome. So what you want to do once you get it in is just give it a little squish. You want that silicone to squish out around the bottom. And that's perfect. And then this is kind of a funkier piece. We're not necessarily going to be able to get a good seal around the edge of this one. This will be more just to hold it down in the form, and that's the other reason why we put silicone on the bottom, is because it holds the wood pieces from floating up in the form because of the buoyancy of the epoxy. All right, so that's a cool piece. Also do this because there's less staining. Certain types of wood, if you get epoxy where you don't want it, it actually can stain the wood, which causes you a ton of problems in the long run. Alright, so I'm just going to squish this down. You end up having to take off a lot more of the surface wood than you want, so if you have already started with a piece that you don't want to be taking any thickness off, that can be a major problem. So wherever you don't want epoxy, make sure you've got a bit of a silicone berm. And I want to mention that if you do have yours flat and you do just have a river, so say you've just got your river void that you want to do, along the very top of your nice flattened pieces, you're going to want to do a nice bead of silicone all the way around the front and then build up just a little bit of a burn on the side. And that'll again prevent it from completely flooding your entire surface and staining. But you've also got that time where maybe you've got a bunch of inclusions, and similar to what we do here, where you're going to want to actually flood the top and make sure that you've filled the entire thing. So it's up to you. Totally depends on the type of art piece you're making and the types of wood you're making. Again, if you have any questions, always feel free to message me. I'm happy to help. I'm going to let that dry for about an hour. So once you put everything in, set it down, you want to dry it minimum an hour before you pour. Which is a good time to then, move over and get into making sure you've got enough stuff and all of your PP and everything ready for the next part, which is the pour. Before we get started on that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about temperature. We need to make sure that this is stored. Its recommended storage temperature is 22 degrees Celsius, and that's super important because if you store it any cooler than that, it gets quite thick, and then it takes way longer to mix, and I feel like it doesn't mix quite as well, and they will suggest that to you as well. So you want to keep it around 22 degrees if you can store it at that. Now your room temperature is a different story. I like to keep the room temperature that I'm going to be pouring in approximately 18 to 20 degrees. I find 22 to be a bit warm, and the epoxy sets up a little faster that way. So about 18 to 22, in between there's a good range, but 18 to 20 is where we like to keep it. So this is the Polymers Technologies Chill Ice 2. It can be poured up to 1 inch and 7/8 thick, or almost 2 inches, I believe. Again, temperature controlled. Okay, so when you're ready to mix, don't forget your safety glasses. Okay, safety glasses, check. 2 buckets. Polymers Technology recommends that once you pour your part 8 out of here into your bucket, that you mix independently from, so they both get mixed independently for 5 to 10 minutes prior to mixing them together. So that just make sure everything is good and mixed and everything's, moving around before they mix together. Just gives you a really good mix at the end, and ultimately, if you mix it properly, you get a super hard, really good cure at the end, and that's what we're all looking for. So right now we're going to mix 2 liters. So I'm going to mix, in this one I'm going to mix 750 milliliters of the B, and in this one I'm going to mix 1500 milliliters of the A. Polymers Technologies has these awesome buckets that have all of the measure scale on the side, which is really handy. If you don't have that, again, you can, there's lots of different ways to do this. We used to just use different, we'd get another container that, okay, this is a half liter container and you want 2 liters, so you have to do, you have to do your calculations on how much you have to do to get all that. I would recommend just getting these. It makes it a lot easier, but if not, you can figure out the calculations. We did it for a long, long time before we got these. So, so I'm going to start with part A, and like I said, we're going to pour 1,500 milliliters. Make sure you keep your lids straight. Do not open the B until all of the A lids are back on, because you will glue your lid back on to the wrong one, and that's bad. Alright. Oh, it's like bang on the 1,500 mark. Perfect. Okay, so now, and always double check that you're using A and B. When you're supposed to be using B, make sure you're using B. So important. Okay, and when I say perfect, they're like on the line perfect. Do not like, oh, it'll work. No, like make sure it's right. Don't screw it up. I used to do that and then wonder why it was sticky on the bottom, because I didn't do it right. All right, so now we've got our spatula. Again, we're gonna mix. I'm gonna make sure there's no dust in there. Again, it's so dusty. So we're gonna mix them each. I'm not gonna make you watch this, trust me. But I'm gonna show you that we're mixing slowly. We don't mix with a drill. It's not recommended to mix with a drill. You really create way too many micro bubbles. I know it's a pain to mix by hand, but just you'll be much happier with your result after if you don't. So we're gonna be scraping the sides of each one all the way around, 5 minutes for each bucket independently, and then we'll mix them together. So like I said, I'll just show you a cool time lapse of this part. Okay, so we've been mixing for almost 10 minutes. I mixed them each 5 minutes before, so long time of mixing. But you can see we've got a really nice clear mixture. Minor little bubbles that'll all rise in the next 5 minutes here after we're done mixing and pouring. So I have picked, sometimes I go with a color that's already made because these guys have all done such an incredible job of making these colors. But then sometimes I like to just make my own colors. So today I decided we're going to use the Chill Polymers Technology Blue Transparent Drops. So we're going to use a few of those. We're going to use Black Diamond Cobalt Blue, one of my favorite colors. It's gorgeous. We're going to use a little bit of Black Diamond Caribbean Blue, which I also love. And just to give it that little bit of like, you know, Bora Bora color, we're going to use Green Envy. And I really like this one too. It's almost got like a little bit of a gold shimmer in the back. It's really nice. So we'll just be using a little bit of that. So to start, I always say to people, they always ask about how I mix my colors, and honestly, there's only been a very few times that, you know, we're mixing a custom color that somebody wants exactly, you know, this color. Then we have to be really specific. But other than that, I just kind of like to go with the flow and go with what I like. And if it doesn't work out, I usually just add more. Start with, we'll probably do about 3 drops of this to start. 1, 2, 3. To start, and then, like I said, always start small because you can always build on the color. And so I'll get that mixed a little bit so you can see what the color looks like there. Oh yeah. This is just like such a like a realistic blue. Watercolor, it's crazy. I really love this blue. All right. So I'm just gonna show you guys. So you can see that's like 3 drops, and it's really just the nicest color. You can still see all the way through it, which is awesome. So you can still build on that color, which is really nice. I think I will actually add 2 more of that. So 1. Oh, okay, we'll go 3 more. So there's 6 drops of the blue in there, and then now we can start to. I'll mix that, I guess. See what the color is like. I'll show you guys what it looks like before we put anything else into it. There, that's perfect. This is my favorite. Oh, these colors, these drops honestly seem to like have like a shimmer in them, almost like mica, but not. It's honestly, they're really pretty, these colors. Okay, so I'll show you that really quick again. And so it's just a little bit deeper, really nice blue there. So you've got your actual color. The nice thing about these clear buckets that you're mixing into, it gives you a really good indication of what the color actually looks like. Sometimes we mix in in orange buckets or different things, which is, you know, whatever you have on hand, but it kind of skews the color sometimes, so it makes it a little harder to get your, to know exactly what your color is that you're mixing. All right, so we've got our cobalt blue here, and I'm going to show you, we start with, this is probably a 1/4 teaspoon at the most, and I like to try and dust it around the top. The less big clumps you can get in there at the top, at the start, the easier it is to mix. So you can kind of spread it out just nice and dusty, and we'll get our, and I don't like to use the same end in here because you mix the colors then that way, obviously, but just like to tell you guys all the things that I've learned the hard way. All right, so that was again equal amounts, about a 1/4 teaspoon of each of those blues. And then this one, this is where you want to be really careful because you can really get a whole new color when you start adding different ones if you add too much at one time. So we're going to go with, honestly, I think this would be like a micro amount of some kind. This is definitely not going to be any teaspoon measurable amount, but I'll try and give you guys a close. Okay, so it's barely off of the stick right there. Like you can just barely see it. It's just the tiniest little bit. And so I like to start with just a hint of green to start because, like I said, it can change the color really quickly. And you can always add more. So now we've got that. Give that a mix. What about this? This is by far my favorite part, is mixing the colors and seeing them all blend and then getting to pour them in there. And then unmolding it. I don't know. I kind of like it all actually, but this is perfect. I might, well, actually I might actually add a little bit more green to this one. I'll show you guys. And so I'll show you we'll cut in with a nice close-up of this getting mixed so that you guys can see the real swirl and color. After all of that, you're finally ready to pour. This is the easy part, the fun part. So just don't drop your bucket. That's bad. Pour slowly, and you should have good tunes on, but out the outside, and that this is our river. So what you're going to want to do is calculate how much epoxy is going to go in here, and you're always going to want to add a little bit more because it does soak into the wood, and then there's always little nooks and crannies that you can't calculate, so you want to go a little higher or do a heavy average. So what you're going to want to do is take 3 measurements of width all the way along here and get an average, and then you've got your length this way, so you'll be able to calculate that and get an average of inches cubed. Because then you're going to also go by the depth that you're going to want to pour at, which is about 1.5 inches. You don't want to go more than that unless you're really wanting to get more than that. So about 1.5 inches thick. So you multiply those 3 numbers together, and that'll give you inches cubed. And then what you do is take that inches cubed number and go over to Google and say, Google, can you calculate, or tell me what 320 cubic inches is in liters, and then it's going to spit you back out a number. And so if it comes back with, oh, it's 6.5 liters, we almost always round up to 7. And then we also usually try and have a backup project, even if it's a silicone mold or something that's already ready, in the event that you do have too much where you're like, oh, well, that was actually too much. I still have this much. I want to do something. You want to have that ready too, because you don't have a ton of time after to try and get a silicone mold or whatever ready. So try and have a little backup project if you can ready. And then do a little more, and then you can make sure that you're going to bring it up. Now, like we talked about in the video before, having that silicone berm, you do, if you want to get the maximum thickness out of your wood, you do want to flood up to that silicone berm, like right over top of the edge, and get it to flat, so then it's flush with that middle center part, so that when you come back in and sand, everything will sand right back down to the wood, and you won't lose any wood when you're planing it down. So yeah, I think that's almost everything I wanted to tell you guys. We're gonna let this set up. It takes 3 days to set up. We do usually tent it with a piece of cardboard. You want to still allow for some airflow to move through, and it's especially nice with the colored pours because you don't see dust as much if it does end up getting in there. If you're doing a transparent pour, you do want to try and mitigate the dust more by controlling your room temperature, keeping it that little bit lower, and then tenting it so that it's not going to heat up on you too much. And then, yeah, so like I said, tent it 3 days, let it set up, and then I'm going to jump over and it's going to magically fast forward to 3 days from now, and I'm going to get to show you guys what it looks like when we get to pull it out here. So awesome. Hey guys, it's 3 days later. Our epoxy's hard, which is awesome, and I'm going to show you how to take it out of the form. You only need to take one side off, which is awesome. We're going to take the bolts out of side 3 and 4, and then the screws out of the bottom on this side, and that will allow us to peel this one side off, and we should be able to knock around the outside and lift it out. These first ones I wanted to show you because I mostly just hand tighten almost all of these. So I'm going to show you that these ones, they're tight, like hand tight, but I didn't tighten them more than just hand tight. So you definitely do not need to overdo this. The silicone on the inside, the seal along your edges is definitely what keeps your epoxy in there. You want them, you know, like I said, you want them together, but you don't need to over tighten. So I'm going to go ahead and use a drill now, but it is a 7/16 wrench that you will need to take them out if you're going to use that, or you can use, like I said, to take them out, a socket. Much faster. All right, so now we're going to tip it up, and there's just 2 Robertson screws on the screw. And then now you are able to very easily knock your one side off, and I can see you've revealed your one edge. And what we're going to do now is go around and just lightly tap, and this just releases the epoxy from the HDPE. There we go. And you can actually see it releasing around the edge, so just watch for that. And then I use that paint scraper I showed you guys originally in the video to get right up underneath. And sometimes you have to use just the hammer just to get in just under an edge first to pop it up. And this is perfect. So sometimes they don't come out and sometimes they do. So we've got a couple pieces that came out with our form. And so that's awesome because I want to be able to show you guys what you need to do after to reuse your form. So here's our awesome piece though. Oh, that's so cool. Right on, and it looks awesome. This is really cool. So I will be cutting, like I said to you guys, we left this one really proud, but we're going to cut this off on the bandsaw and then make it flat again so we can show you exactly how to finish next. But now you've got your form, you've got some pieces that have come out. So all you're going to do is check to see which side is the side that we've roughed up to send to you. And you peel all this silicone all off again. Put your pieces back where they need to go. So this one's roughed up. So what you do is if there is any excess silicone on this side, you're going to use the paint scraper that you have. And you're going to come in and just scrape any excess off of here. And then once you've done all that, you're going to add a nice big bead of silicone again. Clean this off first and then add a bit of silicone on there. And put it in. I will mention, I did this backwards again, and in the video you'll notice that I did a little bit backwards. You have to put the long sides in first, and then the short sides. It's actually built that way so that the short sides actually push the long sides out, and again, I don't know why I did that wrong in the first one, but definitely make sure you put the long sides in first. And what else did I want to tell you? At this point, you're ready to, again, you can put it all back together, and you can pour again right away. You just have to put this side back on, put everything back in, and away you go again. So thank you guys again so much for the order. And if you have any questions ever about any of your projects, please send me a message. I am happy to help. We are going to do, so this concludes this part of the video to get you to this point. Now, like I said, I'm going to cut that off, flatten it, and then we're going to start with how we finish with our fest tool. This is how we finish everything. If you just have a regular sander, you can use exactly, you know, same methods that we use and just transfer them over to whatever tool you're using. And yeah, I think that's it. I can't wait to show you how we finish everything after that. And then you'll have your own awesome art piece or cutting board. So thanks.